World News Today, brought to you by the Admiral Corporation, makers of Admiral Radio, America's smart set. By shortwave broadcast, direct from important overseas stations, as well as leading news centers of our own country, CBS correspondents are waiting to bring you a complete report from the world's political and battlefronts.
Now for our first news direct from overseas, Admiral Radio takes you to CBS Algiers, Winston Burdett reporting. We regret that we are not able to make contact with Colombia's correspondent in North Africa. However, for home front news, Admiral Radio takes you now to CBS Washington, Don Pryor reporting.
Congress goes back to work tomorrow. You can't escape the feeling that it's going to be a tremendously important session. Certainly it will be racked with controversy because all the pent-up wartime pressures of the nation will be focused on Capitol Hill. Here are some of the issues that are waiting to be solved. Taxes. A bill providing a little over $2 billion, one-fifth as much as the Treasury asked for, is awaiting action in the Senate. Subsidies. By February 17th, there will have to be a showdown on the whole question of using subsidies to hold down the prices of food. The argument was postponed a bit by stopgap legislation adopted just before Congress went home for the holidays. Wages. The Senate has passed and the House is all ready to act on legislation which will give the non-operating railroad employees an arbitrary 8 cents an hour increase in wages. And then there's the red-hot question of labor policy in general. The recent steel strike and the threatened railroad strike are certain to lead to demands for more stringent labor legislation. There will also have to be strong movement in favor of national service legislation, which in effect would be a labor draft. Last night, Major General Hershey of Selective Service announced that occupational deferments for men under 22, whether they're fathers or not, will be curtailed sharply after the 1st of next month. War Mobilization Director Burns has announced the adoption of a uniform clause for war contracts to cover their termination. It's the first big step of the new Baruch organization in preparing for demobilization when the war is over. President Roosevelt's annual message is expected to go to Capitol Hill day after tomorrow, but we still don't know whether the president will deliver it in person. That's up to his personal physician, Rear Admiral McIntyre. I return you to Admiral Radio in New York.
More news in just a moment, but first here is Warren Sweeney with a word from Admiral Radio.
Here in America, when a man's work is done, he can sit leisurely by his radio, perhaps an Admiral radio, and listen with complete enjoyment to his favorite program. But not so with the oppressed peoples of Europe, with Pierre the Frenchman, for example, who lives under the heel of the Nazi boot. Pierre must wait for darkness. In the dead of night, he steals down into the cellar, through the secret door, and there he is, underground. That's where his radio is. There, underground, at the risk of his life, he gets information which tells him when the long-awaited invasion is coming and how to aid by destroying enemy installations, rails, bridges, factories. Through radio, underground, the oppressed learn the truth, learn of the coming invasion that will crush the heart of the enemy. To coordinate an invasion from the sea, on land, in the air, and yes, even underground, it takes radio. Admiral Radio is proud to be part of the coming invasion, just as Admiral was proud in pre-war days of its leadership as the world's largest manufacturer of radio phonograph combinations with automatic record changers. The entire production facilities of Admiral's 2 great plants are devoted to victory. But Admiral gives you this assurance: when victory is ours, the skill and precision now going into weapons of war will be found in your new and better Admiral, America's smart set. Now, here once again is Doug Edwards.
Allied planes continue to hammer the continent. For this news and an interview with one of our fighting men, Admiral Radio takes you to CBS London, Larry LeSueur reporting.
In the past few months, this great aircraft carrier called Britain has become a concentration point for the fighting men of the United Nations. Sunburned men who conquered Africa confer over the map of Europe with those who drove out the Japs from the Aleutians. And here's a man who has seen the war in both the Atlantic and the Pacific. 32-year-old Colonel William J. Cummings of Lawrence, Kansas. He's better known to his boys in the 8th Air Force Fighter Command as Wild Bill Cummings when he leads his Thunderbolt group over Europe. Cummings now escorts our liberators and fortresses to Germany in daylight. But not so long ago, he was fighting Japanese Zeros in the Pacific. Colonel Cummings, which do you consider the toughest theater of war, the Atlantic or the Pacific?
Well, as an airman, there's not much doubt that the war It's tougher here in Europe than it was out in the Pacific. The German planes are just as good, if not better, than the old Jap Zero, and I think the German pilot is more resolute. The Jap fights very hard on the ground, but in the air, the Jap will bluff out just as soon as anyone else.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. But, Colonel Cummings, I understand that although you're a fighter pilot, you've also fought on the ground against the Japs. How was that?
Well, you remember when the Japs attacked the Philippines, we were pretty short of planes. By the time we were driven to Bataan, we only had a few left. We kept passing them and shelling back and forth a minute an hour, bringing in supplies and ammunition. After a while, all our planes were out of action, and my squadron became infantrymen. We had rifles and pistols, and we fought skirmishes with the Jap infantry closing in on our soldiers in Bataan. Things went from bad to worse. Everybody had malaria, dysentery, and dengue fever. Then one day a liberator came from Australia, and 35 of us piled into it, and we flew to safety on the mainland.
You were one of the lucky ones, weren't you? How many of your squadron got out of there, Colonel Cummings?
Just 9 out of the original 40. The rest of my friends are dead or prisoners of war. Some were killed on the ground, some were hit by bombs, some were shot down, and the rest are in prison camps.
You get any rest after that experience, Colonel Cummings?
Yes, after making a few missions over New Guinea against Japanese Zeros, I went back to America. Joined a new fighter squadron, and it sent me over here.
Oh, well, where would you rather be, here or in the Pacific? Living conditions are better over here, aren't they?
Yes, they are, except for the cold.
Well, how about food? That's better over here, isn't it, Colonel Cummings?
Well, on the town we had 2 meals a day, rice and sometimes a little canned salmon. Over here it's spam and Brussels sprouts.
Well, I guess you'd settle for a steak and French fried.
Sure would, Larry. But when this is over, I want to get back and fight the Japs. After you've been strafed and bombed and seen your friends die alongside of you, war becomes very personal. I left a lot of good friends back there.
Yes, I guess the war is more impersonal for our boys here in Europe. Most of them have never seen a German. They've never seen the cities their bombs destroy. Have you ever been in Europe yourself, Colonel Cummings?
No, I never have, but I don't think it'll be long now. Germans almost in the same position as we were in the Pacific 2 years ago. They're on the defensive.
Yep, I guess they are, and I hope you'll keep them on the defensive for a long, long time. Thank you very much, Colonel Cummings. We return you now to CBS, New York.
This week, the Germans made little effort to minimize the disaster facing their troops in Russia and their troubles at home. For a direct report from one of Europe's listening posts, Admiral Radio takes you to CBS Madrid. Glenn Stadler reporting.
As Nazi Marshal Rommel ranged up and down the Channel coast checking his anti-invasion preparations, all of Europe, and especially Holland, Belgium, and France, became visibly more restless. This condition is everywhere reflected in the German-controlled newspapers. Notices of executions of patriots are increasing daily. A typical one from Le Journal of Lyon announces that 3 Frenchmen were shot by a Gestapo firing squad on December 28th. The charge was favoring the enemy. But despite reprisals and 3,000 arrests each week in France alone, anti-Nazi groups become larger, better organized, and more daring. In Valenciennes, a dozen armed men, led by a man brandishing a gun in each hand, broke into the jail, took 50,000 francs, and liberated 5 companions. In a running gun battle, one was killed. The others escaped, some on bicycles. Thus, having failed to quell resistance, the Nazis have reverted again to what they must think is a clever trick, but has had little or no success. It's a periodic appeal to surrender firearms and promises immunity from punishment, even though possession of guns and explosives is illegal. The catch is, of course, that the minute someone is foolish enough to comply, he's arrested. Yes, they promise immunity, but only for the period specified. The person is guilty of having the arms in the previous overlapping period covered by an identical law prescribing the death penalty. German papers carry none of this type of news because the propaganda ministry believes that people might get the wrong idea about life in the occupied countries. Hitler's own Völkischer Beobachter features blasts at the Allies and laboriously written explanations on why the Red Army is in Poland now. The Nazi journals, however, do carry hundreds of death notices daily, and there obviously is a large backlog because many are dated as of 6 months ago. One recently announced the death on the Russian front of a soldier named John Dillinger. Another, in black border and big type, bore only the name Adolf. This is Glenn Stadler in Madrid, returning you to Admiral Radio in New York.
The appearance of Army personnel on this program does not constitute an endorsement of our product by the Army, as the Army does not endorse any product. World News Today is brought to you each Sunday at this hour by the Admiral Corporation, makers of Admiral Radio, America's smart set. Be sure to listen again next Sunday when Admiral brings you World News Today by shortwave, direct from leading news centers of the world.